why Theo is wrong, and we will get a Laravel for JavaScript. This is going to be a fun read. If you didn't already see the video, I made a video about why we'll never see a proper Laravel-like thing for JS. Not because they don't already exist. They do. We have a few of them. The issue is the JS ecosystem just doesn't make a lot of sense for it. If you want to watch that video ahead of time, it probably makes sense, but we'll almost certainly go through all of the core points as we go through here. So let's do it. JavaScript's need for a full stack framework. Bold start. We'll see where we go. Some of you guys might be thinking, wait, don't we have Next.js? Isn't that a full stack framework? No, Next.js is a backend framework. Get your head straight. Anyways, if you're not familiar with tools like Laravel and Ruby on Rails, they are opinionated full stack frameworks for PHP and Ruby. The opinionated word here is key because they have lots of built-in features that follow established conventions so that developers can write less boilerplate and more business logic while getting the industry best practices baked into their app. I did hear an interesting take recently that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I heard it, where somebody unironically said, a backend framework isn't a real backend framework if it doesn't have model view controller. So if it's not MVC, it can't really be backend. And since then, I've realized just how disconnected this world is from reality. But it is what it is. Let's dive in. PHP has Laravel, Ruby has Rails. What does JavaScript have? Theo, answers this question with the opinion that JavaScript doesn't need such a framework because it's better to select the tools you want and build the solution you need yourself. Kind of. I think there isn't a need because you can take any of the people's pre-assembled solutions that has all the parts, and if one of those parts doesn't work, you can swap it out, which is fine. This sounds great, and it also happens to be a nice flex if you're a seasoned dev, but I feel that he doesn't back up this claim very well, and I'm here to tell you why I think he's wrong. In my opinion, the better question to ask is, why don't we have a Laravel for JavaScript yet? The answer being that we're still working on it. In his summary of the full-stack frameworks of the JavaScript world that could be comparable to Laravel or Rails, he fails to consider a few important points. One is that people seem to really want a Laravel or Rails for JavaScript. If they didn't, there wouldn't be so many attempts to create one, and he wouldn't be making a video whose sole purpose is to respond to the pleading cry, why doesn't JavaScript have its own Laravel? Okay, we have our first massive disagreement. There's a lot of things that seem like good ideas, and people keep reinventing them for that reason. Like, if you look at Y Combinator companies in like the early 2010s, there was like probably 100 companies that were ways to meet up with friends. It's like, I want to build a company. I want a better way to meet with friends in person, so I'm going to make an app for that. Or like the 200 companies that are rethinking how we deploy things, but are all just doing the same thing. It's actually very common to think that the reason nobody uses this thing is because it doesn't exist, so I'm going to go build it. But the fact that there are now 3 compelling options for a Laravel-like experience in Rails, which are Redwood, which was a GraphQL focused all-in-one. Obviously, Redwood has now moved over to RSEs and isn't super well adopted. This is probably the first time a lot of you have heard of Redwood because most people don't want this. They don't want batteries, backend, React conventions, and all of these things included in their full-stack JavaScript applications. There's also Blitz, which I inadvertently kind of killed with Create T3 app because our tech was very similar, but mine was more modular. It wasn't even really mine. It was my team's, my community's. I contributed no code to Create T3 app, but we have things like Blitz as well. And the one that I really should do a deep dive on, let me know in the comments how deep I should go, Adonis. Adonis actually seems awesome because it's rethinking things like Nest, which does exist, by the way. I probably should mention Nest. Everybody got mad I forgot to last time. Nest is a Node backend framework for building reliable and scalable server-side apps. Not my favorite thing. It has a lot of not great patterns. It really feels like you're forcing the old Java mindset or your like .NET mindset into JavaScript. Adonis feels much more JS-y, as silly as that sounds. But like the way you register routes, I don't love that you still have to do classes for controllers, but fine. They have commands you can run to generate models and things. Like this is pretty dang close to what you'd be expecting on the Rails side. It's great. But as somebody in chat just so wisely put for me, Adonis is extremely good, but barely used. Yeah. So once again, I need to emphasize the point. People building things does not indicate a strong desire for those things to exist. It indicates a strong perceived desire for them to exist. And the point of my video wasn't that a lot of people want this, so I'm making the video. The point was, I hear a lot of people who aren't that deep in the JS ecosystem saying they want this. And then when I offer them the existing options for it, they say, not into it, not into it, not into it, over and over again. And that's the issue. People don't actually want this. The free market works great at these things. If there's a solution and people want that solution, they use it. Makes no sense. Anyways, This delusion that because someone made it, people clearly want it is why there are millions of indie games that have 0 players. It's why there's millions of side projects that have 0 users. Just because you think people want it because you think it should exist doesn't mean people want it or that it should exist. Point 2. Theo failed to consider the timing and maturity of the underlying tools within the JS ecosystem. Perhaps it's not that a Laravel for JS doesn't need to exist, it's just that it doesn't exist yet due to some major differences in the ecosystems themselves, like how old they are and where the innovation is mostly happening. Can you justify that one? Because how old is Express? Express has been around for a hilarious amount of time now. How old is React? And all your old React code is, for the most part, backwards compatible. Like, I can take a class component from the early 2010s and server render it in my modern Next.js app. So I just don't agree here at all. Like, we have plenty of well-matured tools that make a ton of sense. We also have tools that have had a lot of improvements or shifting as a result. Like in the ORM space, we've rethought how we do ORMs multiple times. Back on the point 1 though, because you made a good call out here, Ham. What YC calls these ideas that seem really good but aren't, it's called a tar pit idea. I should find the video where they talk about this because it's a really strong concept that's important to understand. There's a lot of things that seem like good ideas that actually aren't if you think it through a little bit more. And this is part of why. Like, there are stable tools, but we get excited about other tools as well. You can work in a React code base that's 8 years old and it's fine. You can spin up a new React code base today and it's fine. You can take components and take code from the old code base and copy paste it into the new one, and it's probably also fine. Is this the YC quote? I will drop this one quick. I've been meaning to do more YC adjacent stuff.
What is a tar pit idea? Let's really dig in. What are we talking about here?
A tar pit idea is a consumer idea that many people try. It's an idea. Part of the reason it's a tar pit and not just a hard idea is it has to feel sexy, or you have to get lots of encouragement to work on it. You're likely to get positive feedback. Something about it will emotionally make you not want to pivot away from it. Again, this is kind of what's weird about why we use this term, is if you are not obstinately unwilling to quit working on it, then it's not a tar pit. It's just a regular bad idea. It's just a regular idea if you're not like, and so a true tar pit is one that you will be defensive about when you are presented with evidence that the idea is challenging.
Yeah, I already see the pushback. But Theo, this is about businesses. What we're talking about is open source. These things are different. No, they're not. The important piece to know here is that go-to-market strategy and the way things are adopted is the same regardless if it's free or not. If the thing is a service or a company or a new open source way of building, they all have to convince users to use them. If you have a lot of people saying they want this thing, or a lot of people who want it enough that they're building it, but then no one is using it, it doesn't matter if you're selling it or not. You have the same problem. And what I'm discussing here is that despite all these people falling into the tar pit and thinking this is a good idea, it's been proven again and again it isn't, because no one has adopted it. And if there was other ecosystems that had a good way to build these things modularly, that had this many great options, I'm sure they would be pretty popular too. But in none of these other ecosystems do we have this level of modularity. There are more JS devs than there are PHP devs and Rails devs combined nowadays. And there are more people making libraries for JavaScript than there are PHP devs and Rails devs, period, which is kind of crazy. Enough about this point, though. I want to dig through the other two. As I was saying with point 2, apparently the maturity of the JavaScript ecosystem isn't there. The fact that there are lots of options and there's new things happening all the time doesn't mean the ecosystem isn't mature. It means that we have a lot of options. You can use the old mature option. There's nothing wrong with using Angular and Express. I think you can start with new, better things now. But if you have an old Angular Express app, go maintain it. Totally fine. The fact that we've made better ways to do things isn't a problem in the ecosystem. It's actually a feature. And the fact that you could swap one part out for another too is dope as well. You can change out your ORM and have a reasonable experience because we have type safety that will guarantee that we make changes and they carry over. So if I change my ORM and I get type errors that something's not getting the stuff it expects, I can go fix that. And by the time I have cleared out all the red squigglies, probably good to ship. I've made some crazy migrations in my time. I moved the ping code base from React plus Vite with a folder hosting a bunch of Lambdas over to Next.js. Oh, also, I was using styled components. And I moved it to Next.js with Tailwind, and TRPC came like a month later. And I was able to make all of these changes and shifts in a code base that was getting big pretty quick, but it was still just a solo dev. Clearly that's not relevant, right? Well, guess what? I did the same shit at Twitch at a huge code base. Yeah, we're still on TRPC 9 for ping because I haven't been contributing to the code base much, but I guarantee I could go bump it up to 11 in a day at worst. Also with Next.js, everybody's upset that Next.js keeps breaking. No, it doesn't. You can take a Next 12 or 13 code base, bump the version, and it's almost certainly just fine. You might have to change the next image component to the new version of it, but that's about it. Like, it's fully backwards compatible. We have all these new things that have been added to Next, but the old things still work too. Anyways, that's points 1 and 2. We're already however many minutes in. Let's do point 3. Apparently, I also failed to ask for whom these types of solutions are suitable for. Surely, not all devs have the same objectives, so some might opt for the composable approach, while others prefer to reach for a framework. Yeah, I would call these technical people, the ones who want composability. Like, I'm not one of the people who keep saying that everyone should use Linux, but it's always jarred me that the year of the Linux desktop people are also the ones that hate JavaScript so much, because the whole concept of this level of composability comes from Unix. The Unix philosophy is simple inputs, simple outputs, assemble the pieces together. And the only one of these ecosystems that's really leaned into that is JavaScript. It's a good thing. And if you don't want to make those decisions, pick any of the solutions I just showed, or just use something like Create T3 app that has good solutions already picked for you. There's no shame in that. You have ways to get what you're asking for. If what you're asking for is opinionated, good enough solutions, cool, you have them here. I've changed my mind on some of these. Like, I don't use Prisma on most of my projects anymore, and I would probably use a service instead of NextAuth because authentication, especially once you're dealing with a lot of weird OAuth stuff, is annoying enough that I don't mind using a service. And yes, they sponsor me. I liked them before they did. It took them a year to convince me, though, because it is what it is. This is not a bad thing. We have the solution here. If you want to go through any of these pieces and explain in detail why it's bad, cool, we can have that conversation. Maybe we can improve the piece or swap it out with a better one. But if your issue is that the pieces are bad, talk about that. If your issue is that composability is bad, I don't agree. But you're arguing all the conclusions without actually making the points, which is just annoying to me. Let's keep going, though, because there's more here. Let's take a look at how we got to the point we're at today and how we might be able to bring a full-stack framework like Laravel or Rails to the world of JS. Get shit done. In his video, Theo brings up the point that there's a common saying in the React world now, which is that if you're not using a framework, you're building one. Even though this is meant to be used as a criticism, Theo feels that most JavaScript devs are missing the point in building your own framework is actually an advantage. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is this, to be very clear. I'll show you what I'm saying. We're going to go to Sandbox. We're going to make their example self-rolled. We're going to hop into this folder, and I'm going to npm init. And now I'm going to npm install React. That's a self-rolled framework. Installing the dependencies myself, building everything myself, making my own build process, adding Webpack myself, doing all of that, that's rolling my own framework. You know what isn't rolling my own framework? NPX create next app at latest. Or, I don't know, maybe you're living on the edge a bit, create T3 app at latest. You know what you get when you do this? You get questions for what you do and don't need. What would we call it? T3 example. Want to use TypeScript or JavaScript? Let's say you really hate types. Guess what? You're wrong. We're using TypeScript. But everything else in here is an actual optional thing. If you don't like Tailwind or you want to bring your own style solution, cool. Otherwise, use it. If you don't want to define APIs as endpoints you have to hit manually, you want to use something that will let you just call them like functions, cool. We'll add to your PC. Want to use an authentication provider? You can start with none, or you can start with NextAuth. We'll likely be adding more options in the future too, but you have one option for each of these. You can pick your ORM. We have Prisma and Drizzle now. Do you want to use App Router? Yes or no? I think yes, because I like the App Router. But you can use Pages Router, and you can use them both at the same time in the same app. Crazy. We got libsql, SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, and the Planet Scale binding separate. You have all of these options. And honestly, if you just pressed enter through this whole thing, the result's going to be a good developer experience and a framework that you didn't build yourself. So you just entirely misinterpreted the point here. I might have to go back and see what I actually said, because this is not my point. I don't think everyone should build their own framework. And when we say this in React, what we usually mean is that building all the things around React is bad. If you're building your own way to server render your content, if you're building your own way to load data into your applications, if you're writing your own way to actually bundle the code into React itself, all these types of things. Also, we have good ESLint rules. It's insane. Like, this is probably the biggest reason I don't use Create Next app as much, and I use Create T3 app. Even if I turn everything off, just having better ESLint rules is so nice. Like, we could build this though. The cool thing is that we can have all these different options for frameworks, and you just pick one and then get moving. I don't get it. I feel like I'm being intentionally misinterpreted here. Good old Dax tweets. I feel like half the time a Dax tweet is cited in a thing involving me, it's to defend me, and the other half it's to come at me. It's always fun. I recommend T3 to all the next newbies at work. They love it. That's really cool to hear. Apparently, I feel that the modular nature of JavaScript ecosystem is a huge advantage. Well, yeah, it is. Same way it is in Linux. I said there's an alternative way of seeing it. Oh, okay. Fair. But apparently, this is a lot of pressure on the average dev to make unnecessary judgment calls and manage a lot of boilerplate code. This isn't coming from somebody unironically defending model view controller, right? Right. Let's run a poll. What has more boilerplate? Model view controller, literally anything else. Hope this helps make the point clear. Model view controller is notorious for being as boilerplatey as you get. Okay, there are some really rough models like MVVM and domain-driven development that often have more, but MVC is notorious for being nonstop with the chaos that is the boilerplate. So to say that there's lots of boilerplate code you have to write is just kind of hilarious to me. Let's look at all the boilerplate for Drizzle. I set up Drizzle in this code base, right? Let's look at the boilerplate for our ORM real quick here. Source, server, DB. Here's our database connection. So this is how we connect to the DB. Create database connection in development. This avoids creating a new connection on every HMR update. Nice of us to leave a little comment here that says why we do or don't do this. Then we have the actual client and we connect it. Cool. Now I go to the schema. Is a schema boilerplate? Is defining what is inside of your database boilerplate? Well, I guess if you live deeply enough on client side, anything involving databases feels like boilerplate. But I would argue this is the furthest thing from boilerplate. This is the actual model in my database. Cool. What else is there that is boilerplate here? I guess there's the Drizzle config, which is how the Drizzle CLI knows where things are. It's boilerplate in the sense that there's no one place that the schema goes. So you have to make this file to tell Drizzle where the schema is and what type of SQL you're using and how to connect. And then the optional tables filter if you want to have multiple things in one table, which funny enough is a pattern that we stole from the PHP community because I missed the ability to have multiple projects in one database using prefixes, which I learned from being deep in WordPress back in the day. So I bullied the people over at Drizzle into adding this feature. And now we have a really nice ORM feature that most ORMs in every ecosystem are missing. Well, I don't want that. Cool. It's gone. No more prefixes. It's not boilerplate if it's the actual code that describes the thing. Kind of insane to say otherwise. If you have examples, again, of us having a lot of boilerplate, feel free to show me them. Arguably, the tRPC stuff is maybe one, but you'll never touch these files once the code base is initialized, which is, sure, there you go. There's your boilerplate. But this code file, if you ignore the comments, is like 15 lines of code total. Where's the boilerplate? Just show it to me and I'll acknowledge it, but there's very little. What's WASP? Everybody keeps saying this one. I've heard a lot of people asking for my thoughts on WASP. I've never seen somebody talking about shipping it. That's my issue. Oh, this blog post is by the WASP team. Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm reading an advert for WASP. Fun. Well, let's see if they can finally get some users then. Sorry to dunk on a fellow YC company, but the fellow YC company dunked on me first. So, things just got way more fun. Anyways, sure, you have the teams that need to innovate and meet the needs of special use cases. These are the ones that prioritize modularity. They tweak, improve, and squeeze as much out of the developer experience and performance as possible to get their unique jobs done right. This is just... I don't have the right word for it. Ugh. On the other hand, there are also numerous teams whose main objective is producing value and innovating on the side of the product they're building instead of the tools that they are using to build it. I really hate this particular argument of the people who are actually shipping aren't using these tools. Who is shipping? Who is building real services as a business that aren't using tools like this? I can count on one hand the number of actively heavily used services that aren't using React, and most of them are using something similar to it. The industry has moved. Are you saying that the entire industry is wrong? Because if so, as a YC founder, you have an awesome opportunity. If it turns out everyone is making it way too hard to build, cool. Don't sell your weird framework, private it, hide it, and go use it to build better things faster than all these other people are. Reddit killed themselves by building way too much shit around their React code, just go build a better Reddit. If you can build so much faster, do it. Show us. Prove it. But it turns out the velocity of building with these tools is actually just as good, if not better. And I promise you, I have never moved as fast as I do in a full stack Next.js application. We'll keep reading though. These devs will favor a framework that allows them to focus solely on the business logic. This gives them a stable way to build stuff with best practices so they can easily advance from one project to another. In this camp are also the lean, mean indie hackers looking for frameworks so they can move fast and get ideas to market. If you're going to unironically say the levels.io way of building, which is a single PHP file that auto ships via FTP every time he saves it with no Git, is the right way. Wait, no, I think he auto commits on every save now, which is progress for him. If you actually think that's the right way to build, cool. The entire industry disagrees. And that's going to be the theme here is if they're going to say people want this, I'm going to say, where are the people using it? These are just platitudes and they're not even good ones. Like the numbers don't lie and no one is reaching for building this way anymore. This is going to be a fun comparison because as you guys know, I'm a Mac guy. We'll see where we go here. It's a bit like the difference between Mac and Linux. Mac's unified stack that just works out of the box means many professionals prefer it for its productivity, whereas Linux is great if you're looking for flexibility and have the time and knowledge to tweak it to your desires. Both are valid solutions that can coexist to meet different needs. I like that he put this in here because he has given me a great platform to run off of. Because honestly, I kind of agree. JavaScript is the Linux here, and things like PHP and Laravel or Ruby and Rails are the Mac here. If there's something you don't like in Linux, there's probably 15 other options to pick, or you can contribute your own solution or build your own solution. If there's something you don't like in macOS, you are fucked. You are absolutely fucked. The only reason I use a Mac is because I have a whole bunch of software that I like that only runs on Mac and Windows. And I think we can all agree that Windows is a shit show. Programs that I love, like Affinity Photo, don't run on Linux. Programs that I love, like anything AV, are unreliable on Linux. If I could have a good experience doing a lot of those types of things on Linux, I would legitimately consider the move. But then there's also the point that the hardware is way better too. The reason macOS is better here isn't because it's including all the things you could ever need. It's actually the opposite. It's because the things I need happen to be installable on macOS and not installable on Linux. And the hardware I like comes with macOS and it's not a good experience to use Linux on it. So this is a great analogy here because Mac's unified stack that just works out of the box is not my experience using macOS. I had to put a lot of time into getting my Mac set up to the point where I can set it up the way I want it in under 30 minutes. On Linux, I can write a script to do that. But yes, for people who aren't programmers or aren't technical, Linux is going to be hard if you go set up Arch Linux. But thankfully, much like there is in JavaScript, there's a lot of other options in the Linux community that are much easier to maintain and for the most part, just work. You can go use Linux Mint. You can go use Pop! OS. Even Primogen's just using Pop! OS or Ubuntu nowadays. And as much as I love to do the audio drivers dunk, and I do this dunk all the time, I love making fun of the Linux people because they get so angry. It's so weird to say the way Linux is building is bad when you're trying to appeal to developers. It's hilarious. Like the argument for Mac is that it has things we want. It's generally slightly more stable and it has professional software that I rely on. The argument isn't that by being a unified stack, Mac is magically better. Mac is better because they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars making it better. And the fact that Linux can even keep up is hilarious. Now to go back to the comparison we're here for, which is Laravel and PHP or things like that versus the modular JavaScript ecosystem. If there was Apple levels of funding behind Laravel, absolutely best in class, nothing else will ever compare. But in the reality, which is that a lot of people are contributing a lot of different ideas and things are moving forwards and backwards and all over the place, the Linux way of building it won. Linux is used on every server now. A more honest version of this comparison would be Windows Server versus Linux, because Windows Server's a unified stack that just works out of the box. But Windows Server went so poorly that even Microsoft moved to Linux for their servers. This is a moment I will never forget. The Microsoft Hearts Linux in a Microsoft presentation where they confirmed that they're going all in on Linux for everything Azure going forward, because Windows Server sucks. Being an all-in-one solution isn't good unless the all-in-one solution has everything you need. But as soon as it doesn't, as soon as one piece isn't quite what you expect, you are fucked. But in a modular system, you swap out that piece. That doesn't mean you don't have similar starting points where you can just start with Ubuntu or just start with Mac. But as soon as things don't go how you want, one of these sides helps you, one of these sides fucks you. So I love that you put this in here because it shows just how silly your framing is. The focus on productivity is what made Rails so powerful back in the day, and why Laravel is such a loved framework at this moment. And the many attempts of creating such a framework for JS is proof enough that there's a large subset of JS devs who also want such a solution. No, it's a tar pit. We've been over this. The reason Rails was popular is because all the other solutions sucked. If the average Linux install didn't come with a GUI and you had to figure that out yourself, which it did for a while, then yes, no one would use Linux. And no one did use Linux. Rails was the best solution at the time by a mile. I will never pretend otherwise. If you were building web applications in the late 2000s and early 2010s and you weren't using Rails, you were handicapping yourself, period. Everyone who wasn't using Rails at the time was moving exponentially slower than those who did. It forced the whole ecosystem to move forward. And we owe Rails a massive gratitude for showing us that the way we had been dividing backend and front end was stupid, and that we should have a system that acknowledges all of these parts at once. Since then, we've been able to take a step back and reinvent the pieces, but the all-in-one solution was so powerful. Even just Active Record and the idea of an ORM baked into a framework that understood the language was so powerful that it pushed the whole ecosystem forward. But to pretend that things haven't moved forward since is just delusional. And that's why I'm so frustrated, because I'll sit here and gladly acknowledge all the progress Rails made, all the progress Laravel's making. Laravel's stuff with inertia is awesome. The way that they're acknowledging the relationship between the server side and the client side and allowing you to bring better client-side solutions is awesome. But if we sit here and pretend that Rails was right and everything since then has been a step backwards, you're just doing the old man yells at cloud thing. Generally speaking, people move towards better things. And if the ecosystem is moving, and it's been moving like this for like 10 years now, we need to acknowledge that. Someone said in chat, inertia also works with Rails. Yeah, sure. Here's the take on that from the creator of Laravel, Taylor Ortwell. This is a great quote, and I'll be using this in a lot of content going forward. Buttons.
It's now a different team in charge of that template. Or just in your own mind.
I would like to believe if I could get DHH to try inertia, he would just delete Hotwire. That's what I would like to believe. Because I think... I do think like it's holding Rails back, and I loved DHH is my hero, and I hate to say it pains me to say this, but it's holding Rails back. And you can Hey Calendar is the perfect example of how and like
by refusing to acknowledge things like inertia, which if you don't know what inertia is, probably worth contextualizing it. Inertia is an acknowledgement that the all-in-one solution doesn't work. That you do need things more modular, especially on the UI side. Inertia lets you bring React, Vue, Svelte, and all the things you might use with those into a PHP app. And if you're building anything even vaguely interactive, most of the people in the Laravel community say, yeah, don't use Laravel in Livewire for the UI, use Laravel for everything on the server side, and then inertia to actually push that to the UI. Why can the people who make these tools acknowledge the things, but the people who are mad about these tools can't? It's annoying that they'll continue to pretend that the Laravel team is on their side here when they're not. The best devs acknowledge that an all-in-one solution is fundamentally worse at important things. And the ones that succeed, like Laravel right now, are the ones that embrace that and give you really good escape hatches. But maybe the reason such a framework doesn't exist yet doesn't have to do with whether devs want one or not, but rather the important factors which are needed in order for such a framework to come together haven't aligned until this point. But we showed 3. For such a framework to be widely adoptable, it first needs underlying technologies that are stable enough to build upon. After that, it needs time and many iteration cycles to reach maturity itself so that devs can feel comfortable adopting it. More platitudes. You're not saying anything here. The underlying technologies are super stable and widely adopted. Express hasn't changed its API in like 8 years. Angular code from forever ago still works today. AngularJS to Angular was rough, but that was... When did AngularJS to Angular 2 happen? Angular 2 was 2016. It's been 8 years. 8 years since Angular had a major breaking change like this. It just... Like, why are we saying this? We have plenty of stable solutions in JS. The fact that we don't like those solutions is a different problem because it turns out the things we started with weren't ideal and we could iterate on them a bunch since, and we have, and we've made awesome things. But why are we pretending this is bad? I'm just confused still. Also, by the way, to say this when you're shilling Rails, do you know how people felt about Ruby at the time Rails came out? Because I don't think anyone would use the words underlying technologies that are stable or widely adoptable or any of these things with the word Ruby at the time. And I'm saying this as a Ruby fanboy. I was a huge Ruby fan back in the day. And that's a big part of why I went all in on Elixir as well. I think there's great things here. There's great qualities of these languages and great things you can do with them. But Ruby was kind of a joke before Rails happened. And Rails then had to go and invent all of the solutions. And it started getting adopted really quickly, not because we had underlying technologies that were stable enough to build upon. It started happening because we wanted it so badly. We wanted it so badly that we made those things stable. We have stability in JS, but it's on a piece-by-piece level. We're arguably more stable. This makes no sense to me. This feels kind of insane. Have these factors aligned in the JS world to give us the types of frameworks that PHP and Ruby already have? Maybe not quite, but they do seem to be slowly coming together. Comparing ecosystems. One of Theo's main points is that JavaScript as a language enables a level of modularity and composability that languages like Ruby and PHP don't, which is why Ruby and PHP ecosystems are well served by full-stack frameworks, but JavaScript doesn't need one since you can just compose stuff on your own. While JavaScript is a peculiar language, with its support for both functional and imperative paradigms as well as the dynamic nature, it also comes with a lot of pitfalls, although it has improved quite a bit lately. So you don't typically hear it get praised in the way that Theo does here. In fact, you're probably more likely to hear praise for Ruby and its properties as a modular and flexible language. I can't play this talk because it's not on YouTube and I don't want to be the one to put it on YouTube. But I highly recommend people go watch Watt, the Gary Bernhardt talk, because it does a great job of mocking JavaScript and it does an even better job of mocking Ruby. I'm saying this as a Ruby fan. Ruby's a wonderful language. Ruby's a fucking terrible language. And as Gabriel pointed out, I never made this about the language in my video. But if you want me to, I'll do it here. Ruby's a weird, quirky, strange, slow, poorly built language. And without things the ecosystem made like gems, it would actually be unusable. And if anyone here thinks gems are a better experience than NPM, you haven't used either heavily. It's not. It's bad. And like the modularity in JavaScript is inherent to it. And I can show you why. There's a very obvious reason why the modularity is inherent in JS. I'll show you. I'll actually show you by using your blog post. We're going to go to the head and look at that. We have multiple different script tags that we loaded. The default original JavaScript experience, which is loading a script tag in the browser, lets you load multiple script tags. It is modular by design. None of these other languages are. We've hacked modularity into them, and admittedly, we've hacked it into the server side with JavaScript as well, with Node, and then all the things we built with NPM, but it's not that simple. Also, God, Nokogiri, you're giving me flashbacks that hurt me deeply. Oh, God. Yeah, no, it's insane. Like this feels like you haven't used much Ruby. And I am not the person who's supposed to be coming here with all the Ruby on Rails experience. I haven't used it since 2016. But what the hell? I moved more code off of Ruby than I wrote in Ruby. And I'm saying this again as a Ruby fan that loves Elixir because I took all those good parts and made something actually nice that had package management built in, that had functional paradigms at the core, that had a good framework ready to go super early with Phoenix. Ugh. I did not write any Ruby at Twitch, motherfucker. Don't try to out me like that, Aiden. I deleted more Ruby than I wrote by a lot. I wrote all my Ruby at Amazon, not at Twitch. Anyways. So if this isn't some unique properties of JavaScript as a language that makes it the king of web dev, then what is it? It is a unique property of JavaScript that makes it the king of web dev. Again, I will show you. If we go here, see this? You know what this file ends with? This script source? .js. Let's load a .php or .ruby file in here. Dare you. Let's see some RBs in our script tags. Oh, wait. None of it works that way. It could be .go if you also ship 5 megabytes of garbage collector. But the reason that JavaScript won the web is because JavaScript's the only language other than HTML that works on the web. Duh. And again, these other communities have acknowledged this. Like, even Laravel acknowledges that JavaScript's the language of the web. There's a reason for it. It's the language that the web supports. There's an obvious reason for this. This just feels like such a disingenuous question. Let's see what he does with it, though. Oh, cool. Didn't need to do that whole rant. I am sorry. Way back when most of the web development was happening on the server side, PHP, Java, Ruby, and other languages were reigning supreme. During this era, devs would only write small pieces of functionality in JS because most of the work was done on the server side. Yeah, cool. But as web development evolved, we started building richer apps with more dynamic, responsive, and real-time features. A lot of code moved away from the server and over towards the JavaScript on the client, because it's basically the only language that supports this. So instead of doing your development mostly in PHP or Ruby with a little bit of JS sprinkled in, you are now splitting your apps between a substantial amount of JavaScript on the client plus Ruby or PHP on the server. JavaScript's final power move came with the arrival of Node.js and the ability to also write it on the server, which secured its position as the king of web dev languages. Today, devs can, and do, write their entire apps in JS. This means you need to know only one language, or one less language, while you're also able to share the code between frontend and backend. This has opened up a way for a better integration between frontend and backend, which has snowballed into the ecosystem we know today. I agree, it snowballed right into inertia. Really happy I'm keeping this tab open, because we'll be referencing it a lot. So it's not so much the unique properties of JS as a language that have made it the dominant ecosystem for web dev, but more its unique monopoly as the only language that can be used to write client code, plus it can also be used on server side. Yeah, this is fair. I agree. JavaScript isn't good. JavaScript is good enough. I will never sit here and pretend JavaScript's a great, perfect language. I have many languages I prefer, but because JS is a necessary evil, it is unnecessary to introduce other things unless you have a really good reason to. Cool. We've got infinitely more people making awesome solutions in the JS ecosystem. That's right. It's exactly those infinite number of devs working in the space, creating the flexibility and the modular solutions for JS, rather than it being an innate quality of the programming language. Again, not super fond of this point, because as I showed, JavaScript is inherently modular, the way that you load in and out scripts, the way that you can call things to and from each other. It's much more modular by design than any of the other languages we've referenced so far, but each their own. And because the JavaScript ecosystem is still the hottest one around, it has the most devs in total while continuing to attract new ones every day. This means that we get a large, diverse community doing two things: innovating and building. The innovators and influencers tend to be the loudest, and as a result, opinions largely skew in their favor. But there's also a lot of building, or normal usage, happening. It's just that the innovators tend to do the talking on behalf of the builders. This is the thing that made me hesitant to be a YouTuber. And I'll be honest, it took longer to happen than I expected. The fact that the decades I have spent building, the fact that I was the go-to guy at Twitch when a deadline wasn't going to be hit, that was pulled in to make sure we actually got the product shipped in time, the fact that I've been contributing and assisting in open source projects and ecosystems from the OG days of CyanogenMod on Android to the modern days of all this cool JavaScript stuff, gets immediately written off because I'm not a builder, I'm an influencer. It sucks. It's sad that because I have a popular YouTube channel, my history of building and creating things that I'm genuinely really proud of gets entirely ignored. In fact, it's positioned in opposition to me. That I am the influencer, and the only reason the things that others build are using the same tech as me is because they're listening to me. They don't realize it's the opposite way. After over a decade of building and settling on the technologies I liked, because they were the ones that let me ship the best, then I started making influencer type stuff. But I spent decades in the shadows, just learning, listening, chatting with people, trying new things out. And I became influential, not because I'm really good at the influencer thing. I became influential because I did something that resonated with a lot of people. If we go to my channel and we look at the oldest video, it's my old iPhone 11 ultra wide skate video. But the second oldest, my first actual code video, it wasn't a video. I was talking with some friends about my new stack, which I coined the T3 stack because I missed the idea of things like the mean stack. I feel like we had lost that. So I made the T3 stack as like a modern alternative way of thinking of those things. I was talking about it a bunch. I was struggling to show people how simple it was and how easy it was to build that way. So I went live on Twitch and I built an app from scratch that way. Since then, it's been viewed by 300,000 people as my first ever tech YouTube video. And that happened not because I'm this massive influencer pushing all these things because I'm popular. My popularity came from the fact that I picked good things. Half the things in here were not even known at the time. No one knew what TRPC was. I am certain of it. There are numbers to prove it. Planet Scale was still super early. My influence came from the fact that my opinions lined up with those of the builders, because we can all agree there are more builders than there are influencers. I think people get this order of events wrong so often. Influencers don't guide builders. Builders guide influencers. The reason I was popular is the influencers at the time sucked. Not in the sense that they were really bad at making videos, or even in the sense that they weren't good technically, but they were so focused on a specific way of influencing and talking about things, and the things they were talking about were so outdated or specific to the companies that they were working at that didn't resonate with people. And the videos I make and the tech I talk about resonates with people. If you want to flip this as I'm popular, therefore these technologies are popular, and not I'm popular because these technologies resonated with people, then I can't convince you at all. But I wish you luck as a YC company, because you need to understand how these things work. If you don't understand that the builders, that the users, that the customers are the ones who control the market, then you don't understand the market. And this is the classic old man yells at cloud of, oh, it's the innovators tricking people into using the wrong thing. Back to this. So with all that's going on in the JS ecosystem, is it pointless to try and build a lasting framework for JavaScript devs, as Theo suggests, or are we on a path towards achieving this goal, regardless of what the innovators might claim? Show me what you're working on. Theo also drops the name of a bunch of current JavaScript frameworks that have either failed to take off or just can't seem to get it right when it comes to building a comprehensive full-stack solution. Are we actually going to use star history? I love pointing at star histories for fun, but like this, I will admit, this is a chart of influence. This is showcasing the fact that I am influential because it's not even a boilerplate. The template CLI for initializing a project with my opinions built by my community, not me. Because I mention it enough times and it's resonating with enough people, has a good number of stars. But there isn't really a way for us to showcase how many people are using it because we don't install anything specific to us. We don't have like a number of invocations or any indication in the apps deployed with Create T3 app that they used us. So this is the only way to really measure it. But I think it's pretty clear here, even though I've said all of this. And again, this doesn't matter. There is no number that matters less than your star count. Even then, I think we're doing pretty good here. Also, just saw a good point in YouTube chat. I know, crazy, right? Rails probably wouldn't be used at all if DHH wasn't promoting it. One of the people I talked to, who funny enough is from the JS ecosystem and is convinced that we need a Rails for JS, pointed out the fact that the reason Rails succeeded was that DHH effectively went on a world tour going to every single conference, explaining in detail why everyone else was wrong and they should be building the way he was building. And at the time, he was right. He had invented the best way to build applications by a mile. And when he showed it to people, they got it. And his influence through doing this, through parading his work, resulted in success. And I will never pretend otherwise. He did that and it worked great. Pretending things haven't improved since is delusional, and pretending the fact that like this is a JavaScript problem and that the influence is because I'm popular, not because the things I'm saying resonate, you're just wrong. But sure, I have a lot of stars. Oh, cool. It actually says I have a point. So far, solutions like Blitz, Redwood, Adonis, or even T3 haven't managed to secure the popularity in the ecosystem that Rails or Laravel have in theirs. To be fair, it's quite the timeline difference, but yeah. But these things take time. Have a look at the graph above. Laravel and Rails have been around for 13 to 15 years. The JS frameworks being used in comparison are just getting started, with some of them, like Wasp and Redwood, at similar stages in their development as Laravel and Rails were during their initial years. I think there's a more important point here that we're glossing over, which is the fact that the number of devs that are on GitHub and pressing the star button has probably 100 to 1,000x'd since 16 years ago. Like the number of people on GitHub looking at these things, clicking the star button, trying this stuff out is so exponentially higher that the value of the time here isn't they were out for so long, that's how they grew their audience. The value is that when they started, there was a smaller pie that they were eating from, and they won the pie. Like Laravel and Rails were huge at their times. Rails especially, which is funny because when you look at Rails' curve, it doesn't seem great. When you realize this is like 5,000 stars back in like 2009, that is insane. Getting that many stars that long ago is a massive, massive achievement. And it shows that Rails was very relevant even a year or two in. So I just fundamentally disagree with the framing that the reason the difference exists here is because Rails and Laravel are older, because Rails took off early. Adonis has not. Blitz has not. Redwood has not. Rails took over because nothing else like it existed, and it had a bunch of demand because it was shown to people. They were like, yeah, that's better, and they used it. Kind of why T3 app is doing well too. But none of those other solutions have resonated with people. That's the issue. These don't resonate. People don't like them, or they look at them, they're like, yeah, that's a cool idea, and then never bother because it doesn't resonate. The main overlying issue that tends to plague these tools is that JS as an ecosystem is moving quite fast. So for a solution like this to survive long-term, it needs to not only be opinionated enough, but also modular enough to keep up with the shifts in the ecosystem. It feels weird to me that a Rails and JS framework blog is writing about how Theo is wrong about Rails and JS frameworks, almost from the perspective that they are the third party to the conversation. Yes, it's kind of weird that they're pretending, and it misled me at the beginning too, that they are somehow less biased than me, which is really funny because they are objectively, hilariously more biased than me. They have a business that has investors that are based on the success of their framework. So they have like their whole livelihoods tied into the fact that they are right and I am wrong. If I'm wrong, that's free content. Hell, I'm pretending I'm wrong in the thumbnail and title so I can get free content. I love being wrong. Being wrong makes me better. It makes me more effective as a developer. It makes my content better. It makes my ability to manage the community better. It makes me a better advisor. It makes me a better CEO. It just makes me better. And if the T3 stack fails, upload thing is fine, ping is fine, all these other things I'm doing and building and advising are not just good, they're probably better off. If I learn I am wrong about a thing and I make a move accordingly, that is good. They can't do that. They are fucked if it turns out I'm right here because they built a whole business around the assumption I'm wrong. So thank you for bringing this up, Nominate. It's a very important point. I don't know if they disclose who they are throughout the blog post. We'll see as we go. Here's a comment that they pulled in. People in JS seem to be terrified of being opinionated. Every framework has to work with every library. Everything needs adapters. Everything needs opinions that must be decided first. What I want is a no bullshit framework that just has everything I need to start adding value from day zero. And it has the longevity and backing to maintain it over time. Cool. Adopt one. We have a bunch. Just use it. I promise you Redwood's going to be fine. And I want to emphasize one more thing about Redwood that I should have pointed out. Redwood's not just made by some randos. The original creator of Redwood is Tom Preston Warner. If you're not familiar with Tom Preston Warner, he was the co-founder of GitHub. He is one of the deepest people in the Rails world. He's the one who built GitHub on Rails. And after leaving GitHub, he decided that JavaScript is the future, so I'm going to build Rails for JavaScript. And who in the world would be more qualified for that than Tom Preston Warner? I cannot think of a person. Tom is an incredibly talented dev. His understanding of the ecosystem, his understanding of what developers need to succeed is unreal. It's actually unreal. Why this would fail, despite being built by the right people at the right time doing the right thing, isn't because influencers are convincing people otherwise, and it's not because developers are terrified of being opinionated. It's because nobody actually wanted this. I could still be wrong, but it statistically speaking doesn't seem likely. Oh God, Blazing Meteor. Talk about disasters. Another factor is not going big enough with the framework because it seems too daunting a task with the JavaScript ecosystem where things move fast and everyone is terrified of being opinionated because they might get criticized by the loudest voices in the scene. No. When I talk shit on Redwood, I'm not talking shit on Redwood. I'm talking shit on the fact they added GraphQL in a place where it doesn't make any sense. Like GraphQL in between here makes so little sense that the people who built it weren't using it in their apps. App Factory, I always forget his actual name, but one of the core contributors to Redwood uses it at his company, realized GraphQL was getting in the way, so he gutted it and threw tRPC in. I also think Storybook's a terrible anti-pattern and should be removed from most application code bases. Like if it's an application and not like a component library, Storybook's a terrible anti-pattern. It's just going to get in your way. And even people who think this full stack approach makes sense, they largely agree now too. Yeah, I don't get it. In other words, frameworks that avoid going big on their own and going truly full stack, like Rails and Laravel went, missed the opportunity to solve the most common pain points that continue to plague the JS developers. Sure. Where? But the JS ecosystem is maturing and stabilizing. We're learning from previous attempts, and there will be a full stack framework bold enough to go all the way in, get enough things right, and persist for long enough to secure its place. Been around for a while. Oh, here's your ad. I didn't mention WASP because no one mentioned WASP to me. You know what? Here's what we'll do. We're going to go to my favorite place, my comment section. Got one comment about WASP. One. Check this out. Nest, 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 nest. I also didn't mention Nest, by the way. This is why I didn't mention WASP, because I thought it was a side project. I didn't think it was something people were actually pushing or taking seriously. Even this isn't even part of WASP. It's code is like a wasp's nest. Time to add some AI to it like WASP 7 months ago. Cool. Here's all of the comments I've ever gotten with WASP in it, and only 2 of them are relevant, and 1 of them is 7 months ago. So that's why I didn't mention it. Because despite getting literally hundreds of comments a day, it's never been mentioned to me. I didn't fail to mention it, I had no reason to mention it. And if you're going to be this bad faith with me, I see no reason why you should get the free promo. But here, you're getting your free promo now. Happy you got mentioned after you intentionally hid this for the rest of the blog post? Ooh, this looks fun. This looks very fun. Let me grab that. In the annual Stack Overflow development survey, PHP has fallen from 30.7% in 2018 to 18.58% in 2023. The JetBrains Developer Ecosystem Survey shows a similar drop-off from 30% in 2017 to 18% in 2023. There are other things that cause this, similar to the star point I made earlier, which is that there's probably 2 to 4 times, maybe even more than that, people taking the Stack Overflow Dev Survey in 2023 than were taking it in 2018. I have to go check the numbers to confirm, but I would be very, very surprised if that wasn't the case. If anybody has those numbers and can quickly confirm for me that there's a huge bump in the number of people between these 2 years, that'd be helpful. My gut feel is that the number of PHP devs hasn't gone down that meaningfully, but the size of the pie has grown, which has resulted in their percentage being smaller. That's my gut feel. Could be wrong on that. I don't think picking your language and higher ability is a thing that makes a whole bunch of sense anyways, but like, I promise you, if you want to make money, you can make a lot of money in PHP or in JavaScript. There's a bunch of old and new PHP projects, and a lot of them are actually struggling to hire because so many new devs are going JS and not PHP. You have a competitive advantage if you pick an older, more battle-tested language that people are struggling to hire for. That's fine. I don't like comparing the percentages of devs using a thing as like end-all be-all proofs. Like orders of magnitude differences are nice. Like if something's 100 times more popular than something else, worth indexing on. But if it's like a percentage difference that is recent, useful info. It's funny because my university taught me assembly and MIPS and C++. With WASP, we decided to go big, opinionated, and truly full stack. In other words, we're going all in with this framework. This means thinking from first principles and designing a novel approach that only WASP uses, like building our own compiler for our configuration language and truly going full stack, while also keeping it modular enough to move together the ecosystem or with the ecosystem as it progresses. So here's how I'm thinking of this. Remember that comparison we made earlier to Linux and Mac all the way back up here? Imagine we're right now. We have Mac, we have Linux, and we have Windows. Windows realizes their developer experience sucks, so they embed Linux in it with Windows Subsystem for Linux so that we can have a unified experience with Unix and Mac OS and Linux and Windows. Awesome. We now have an ecosystem. You come in and you think, man, Linux is so good. If only it was not so hard to set up and it was more opinionated. Do you know what we should do? We should make an alternative that is more opinionated. Why? And if you're building your own Linux distro, which a lot of people do, why would you invent your own like desktop environment? Why would you invent your own like graphics runtime? Like you use Stardex or Wayland. You use GNOME or KDE or any of the 15 plus other solutions now for your like graphics layer. There are so many options that rebuilding all of them yourself makes no sense. Like we agree, chat, right? That the thought of making a new Linux distro where you use Linux, but every other part is invented by you feels kind of dumb. I think this is a fair point. If I am entirely off base, tell me. But the idea of looking at the vibrant ecosystem within Linux, the tons of different distributions that use different sets of the existing solutions within them, that throwing all of that away and building your own from the ground up all in one makes no sense. Even Arch doesn't do this, funny enough. As much as it is fun to make fun of Arch, Arch's whole thing is that you install the modular pieces you want on top. And then we get additional distros. Like what's the popular, like Manjaro? Like Manjaro, which is built on top of Arch, but has opinions on top and brings these other solutions in. Like, why would you pretend that reinventing all the pieces yourself is better? WASP is more like Ubuntu. They give you Vite, Node, React, and Prisma. But so do all the other things we just talked about. Redwood does this. Blitz does this. All the other solutions do this thing. But they didn't say that here. What they said here was they built their own compiler. Building our own compiler for our configuration language. You're inventing new things for the sake of it. But the DSL, Theo, the DSL. Ugh. It's really cool for us to see WASP being used today to ship tons of new apps and businesses, and even being used internally by some big names and organizations. Show them to me. I've yet to see anybody talk about WASP. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I'm saying they're very quiet for some reason. It's very confusing to me. Also, are they actually using Prisma and not Drizzle? Because that would be hilarious. That would actually be really funny. Yeah, inventing their own DSL and language that's clearly also very influenced by Prisma, which is funny because I don't miss Prisma files at all. It's actually really nice having everything just in my TypeScript code. That's a cute diagram. I have to install their thing. It's not even using Node. Sure. Database. WASP uses Prisma as a way to talk to the database. You define entities by defining Prisma models using the Prisma schema language between the PSL tags. Ready for a super spicy take? This whole thing can only exist because of how modular JavaScript is. The fact that you can take these solutions, like Vite, like Prisma, and wrap your own crazy thing on top of it is once again part of why JavaScript is cool. If you really want this, you can build it on top of what exists. And if it turns out other people want this, cool, they'll adopt it too. But what you're doing right now is Blitz again. This is literally just Blitz again. You added a custom language on top, but yeah, what do you actually enable? That's a great question, chat. Like what can we do now that we couldn't before? Like how is this better than Create T3 app or Blitz? Oh, here. Config file gives WASP the knowledge it needs to take care of a lot of the boilerplate infrastructure-focused code and allows it to have the unique initial compile time step where it's able to reason about your web app before it generates the code for it in the background. Yeah, it's better because it has a DSL compiler. Yeah, it has more things. You did a great job there. We firmly believe that there will be a full-stack framework for JS, as there is a Laravel for PHP and Ruby on Rails. Seems like at the moment we're still working towards it. Also seems very likely we'll get there soon, given the popularity of current meta frameworks and stacks like Next.js and T3. Sure. You have to be bold enough to try something new. You're not trying anything new. What's new? It just, I don't get it. Yeah, this is a great point. Josh Sayre, who comes from the Laravel community, also did a response to my video. And despite having some audio issues that made it hard for me to watch, the bit that I watched was like first half or so was great. He fully gets it. Laravel is a great way to do Laravel with JS. You just use Laravel and then bring your JS framework. Again, I have to keep citing it. Inertia exists. This exists for a reason because JavaScript is really powerful as a modular thing. Hell, you're building around it for that reason. What do I have to look at here? Oh, God. Main.wasp. Oh, I can't believe we invented another config language. Wait, weren't we complaining about boilerplate before? I thought we were complaining about boilerplate. Why do I have to specify where all of the routes files are instead of the route file just being where the page is? I like config-based routing, but it is boilerplate. I just can't fathom this one. XKCD, is this the, yep. There are 14 competing standards. 14 ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers every use case. Yeah, situation. There are 15 competing standards. I don't get it. I really don't. It's sad because like I was looking for and excited about the potential of a good critique of my video, but I'm still looking for it. I'm sad that the only pushback I've gotten on this video so far is from somebody building a competing solution that has a bunch of investors that they need to sell. Like, yeah, I am trying my best to see if my takes are bad. I am genuinely looking for people to challenge the things I say. I learn a bunch from my audience, but this isn't something I could learn from. And I don't even know I'm going to post this video at this point. If it goes up on the channel, cool. I'm sorry, but yeah, that one just pissed me off. Until next time, peace.